Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. The courage it takes to even attend a discussion like this cannot be overstated. We are going to be touching on some pretty heavy themes, and for some of you may reflect lived experiences you carry every day. We each come into this space with our own stories and our own ways of coping. Tonight's discussion might stir some strong thoughts, feelings, or memories, so please go gently with yourself. You are welcome to step away at any time, take a break, and come back if and when you feel it's right for you. The experience of having a missing loved one feels incredibly isolating, but you do not have to go through it alone. I encourage you to seek support, whether that's someone you trust or one of the services listed on the handout that Lily sent through last week. Please take care of yourself however you need to. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we each gather tonight. I'm on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country and pay my deep respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us tonight or watching. As we come together to talk about missing persons and the coronial process, it's important to acknowledge a truth. First Nations peoples are overrepresented in the missing person space. For many First Nations families and communities, the experience of missing is nothing new. Since colonisation, there has been ongoing and forced disconnection from family, country, culture, and identity, which has created generations of what we know as ambiguous loss. And yet, even in the face of this, First Nations peoples continue to carry strength, resilience, and deep cultural wisdom, finding ways to make meaning, to stay connected, and to care for one another through Aboriginal ways of being, doing, and knowing. I hold this with the utmost respect as we move into tonight's conversation. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that I don't have any personal experience in the coronial inquest process. My brother's remains were found in 2016 after 4 years and 8 months, and whilst the police were still in the process of preparing a brief for the coroner. So many of our questions were answered with Dan's discovery, but we did have a coronial finding about a year later. In 2022, I met the formidable Lily Greer as she was running an extraordinary and ultimately successful campaign for an inquest into her mother's disappearance, which went ahead in 2023. Through that process, Lily realised how much information families are often left to find on their own. So after becoming our very first staff member in 2024, this coronial information session was something she was determined to make happen. So thank you and well done to Lily. And thank you to Jacqui, Stephanie, Jodie and Sarah for so generously sharing your expertise with us tonight. There is a lot to cover, so I'm going to give the abridged intros. Jacqui Hawkins is a former Deputy Victorian State Coroner with a 25-year legal career spanning senior judicial leadership, complex investigations and high-profile inquests. After stepping away from the bench, Jacqui retrained in the science of human behaviour and now works with senior leaders navigating transition, burnout and identity beyond role. She joined the board of MIST in 2024. Coroner Stephanie Williams has a background as a solicitor and barrister in the criminal, domestic and family violence, child protection and coronial jurisdictions, and is a coroner with the Coroner's Court of Queensland. Prior to her 2023 appointment, she represented individuals, companies, government departments and assisted coroners as counsel assisting in inquests across Queensland and the Northern Territory. Dr. Jodie Ledecky has over 30 years experience in forensic mortuaries and has managed the Coronial Admissions and Inquiries, CAE, and mortuary at the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine for over 10 years. The CAE coordinates the initial stages of the coronial investigation, including communication with families. She's part of a team that regularly reviews long-term missing persons reported to the coroner. Sarah Martin is an accredited mental health social worker and grief and bereavement counsellor with nearly 20 years experience supporting individuals and families through sudden loss and complex grief. She has previously worked as a forensic counsellor within the New South Wales Coronial system and has also supported several families of long-term missing persons. During the session, Sarah will share practical self-care strategies, and she will be available for anyone who wishes to speak with her individually this Friday or beyond. In summary, all 5 women are tremendously accomplished, but more importantly, they are deeply compassionate, warm, and generous. So this discussion will be comprehensive, but informal and hopefully very helpful. We're going to go through the fundamentals of the role and functions of coroners, the processes, your rights, the media's role, all the way through to outcomes of an inquest. Then we'll finish with a grounding exercise. As mentioned, we can't have a live Q&A, so thank you for those who submitted your questions over the past few weeks. We did have some come through in the last 48 hours that sadly there wasn't enough time for, but please rest assured if questions come to you either during or after tonight, we will endeavour to get them answered. So Jack, with that, I will hand over to you as facilitator.
Thank you, Lauren, and hello to all the families out there. And it's an honour and a privilege to be here tonight and help you understand the coronial process. So I'm going to just ask some questions of Coroner Stephanie Williams, and I'm going to ask Coroner Williams, is it okay if we call you Steph for the purposes of tonight?
Yes, please do, because I might not answer to anything else.
Okay, great. So Steph, can you tell us what a coroner does?
I think by and large across Australia, we tend to do the same things with a few little differences here and there, but our primary job is to investigate particular types of deaths, including suspected deaths where someone is missing, and try to find who died, where and when they died, what was the medical cause of death, and then what were the circumstances surrounding it.
Yes. And just to be clear, I'm not sure if Lauren said this, but you're in Queensland. So, and Jody and I and Lauren are in Victoria, and Sarah's in New South Wales, and Jody and Lil. So, but broadly they are the same kind of investigative powers. So, coroners can investigate suspected death. Is that the case?
Yes. In Queensland, at least, when somebody is missing and the police believe that person or suspect that that person has passed, they must report to a coroner as soon as they hold that suspicion, and then from there a coroner will investigate the circumstances that led to the person going missing, and then to try to determine whether or not that person has in fact passed.
Okay. And does it mean that the coroner actually does the investigations, or who does the investigations for the coroner?
My experience, which involves the coronial jurisdictions of the Northern Territory and Queensland, is that the coroner will send out directions or orders for investigations. So they'll ask the police to gather information on their behalf, or perhaps departments, government departments or businesses or individuals will be asked to provide information. So it's almost as if the coroner is investigating.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Facilitates it. But is it usually you might ask a police officer?
Most of the time, the police will investigate on behalf of the coroner.
Okay. And what kind of things does the coroner request when, for example, in a missing persons case, there has not been a body found?
It can vary significantly, but most of the time there would be statements from the people who the missing person was last with or who was close to, who might know something about their lives, CCTV footage, bank account, telephone records, if they're available, that kind of thing.
And the police does that for you? They go and get all the information?
Yes,
and I know
subject to a few exceptions, but yeah.
And I know that time frames can be different in different states. I think Victoria is either 6 or 12 months, but for the police to report the death to the coroner, if the suspected death, that is. And then once it's reported to the coroner, then it becomes into your remit.
That's right. And in Queensland, there was never a time frame. There still isn't one. The test is when the police reasonably suspect. So sometimes, for example, I'll receive a report about a suspected death of a missing person, and that person has been missing for a very short period of time, 3 months. But the police have a suspicion based on other information that the person's passed, so they'll report to a coroner.
Okay. And another common misconception of people out there is the difference between an inquest and findings. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, so an inquest will happen for 2 reasons generally. One, to continue to gather information about the suspected person's death, or perhaps the circumstances surrounding it, if the investigations haven't been able to answer enough of the questions that the coroner has. The second reason that a coroner might hold an inquest is if there is some public interest factor. So if there are ways that a coroner thinks or information that similar suspected deaths might be preventable, or there's public health and safety issues that come up during the investigation, then a coroner will think about whether or not to hold an inquest to draw attention to those public health and safety issues. After an inquest, a coroner will publish their findings, which is the decision and a summary of the information that's been gathered as part of the investigation and the inquest. And often there'll be recommendations for change in those inquest findings. In Queensland and the Northern Territory at least, and I'm sure others will correct me for other states, other findings, we call them chamber findings. So that's where an investigation has happened, but there hasn't been a public court hearing in relation to the suspected person's death. So it's the investigation really in summary form in a report, which we call findings.
Okay. And just to be clear for those that are unaware, that an inquest, does that mean that witnesses are called to give evidence, or could you just quickly describe the process?
Sure. Well, the important thing to remember with an inquest is that the purpose is to really find out what happened. Coroners aren't allowed to find someone guilty or liable in respect of a suspected death or any death. So the purpose of an inquest is to have witnesses come along and tell the court what it is they know about the person, or what was happening with them in their life in the days beforehand, or perhaps what investigations happened around the time they were missing and thereafter. Because the coroners have that public interest and health and safety obligation as part of their jobs, they can also look at systemic issues like whether or not the police investigations that were being carried out separate from the coronial investigation, were they adequate? Were there opportunities to do things better? Have there been improvements in the time that has passed since the person went missing and the inquest?
Okay. And sometimes witnesses it can range from a family member to the last person to see the missing person alive, to police officers, so, or even experts in. So Lauren could be called, for example, for her expert knowledge in this area. Yeah, absolutely.
Or doctors, a whole range of different people can be called to give evidence, and families can have some input into what it is a coroner will examine or look at in the investigation when an inquest occurs, and they often have an opportunity to try and persuade the coroner about what witnesses should come along and what information the coroner should be investigating.
Okay, thank you, Steph. I'm mindful of time, and we have a huge amount of topics to get through. So I'm going to go to the next person, which is Jody, who I used to work with for many years and is like a legend. She knows everything about everything. So Jody, she does. Jody, could you tell us a little bit about the process and timelines associated when there is a suspected death? Oh, and you're on mute. Sorry.
Can you hear me? Sorry, there's always something. And I agree with Jacqui. It's a real honour to be here. So I'm from an office which is similar right around Australia, where there's the office which is right at the beginning of the process. So I'm at an office where there's people on the phones to take that report from the police, what just Steph and Jack have said, of a suspected death. Timelines vary, and I have to absolutely open and admit that we're not great. Timelines are not good. Particularly for families that are looking for answers. But for taking a report of a long-term missing person from a police officer, in Victoria it's often about 100 days. It can be longer, can be shorter if there's absolute definite circumstances. But at that point in time, we then take some months to gather all the medical information about that long-term missing persons to ensure that we have not got a person that is deceased in our mortuary, and that is our aim. And also to ensure that we've got all the information that if a person is found deceased next year or the years going forward, we've got that information recorded so that we can immediately identify them if they are found deceased. So the initial timeline for us, which take the report from the police, does depend on the police. Then, after we've received that report, we should put that up to a coroner within a couple of days, if not a week. Then, within a month, we should be reaching out to a family or encouraging the police to reach out to the family. So it should happen within 3 to 6 months, but I know it doesn't always happen that way.
Okay, so it can either be the police or it can be the Coronial Admission Centre.
Yeah, it can be either, and it's generally, and again, I'm not critical of police, but it generally is the police. So what happens is a report comes in, then we send, in our jurisdiction, a request to the police to approach the family to get the DNA. You happy for me to talk about DNA?
Yes, I was just going to ask you, yes. Could you tell us what the process is, the practical steps?
Okay, and I am really conscious that I'm talking about a process here in a very sort of blunt way, and this is really real to you, so I'm just really conscious of that. But so we ask the police, we send them what we call a family checklist. So it's to go through a whole lot of things. So we need information about dentists, if there is a dentist. We also need what we call a DNA reference sample. And the whole purpose of these samples is to actually ensure that if someone's found, they're often found a long time later, that we can actually identify them as quickly as possible. And there are specific people that we need that reference sample from. And we prefer parents, what we call a triangle. That's a whole nother lecture. But
right.
We guide them to get those samples.
So there's more, so the parents are the most direct DNA, but then can you use siblings or other people, or what's the triangle?
Yeah, it's definitely the parents. So we call it the parents and the child.
Yeah.
We definitely prefer what we call the maternal line. And the reason why we say that is that the way that we sometimes have to retrieve DNA from bones, from a skeleton, if someone's found long term, then it's easy, it's better, the results through what we call the maternal line. But if we don't have that, the other lines or any of the closest relative is still good. So we get that DNA, and that happens all around Australia. Then one of the first things that we do, our labs, I say the royal we, meaning all the very specialist people I work with, and is place that on a database, a Victorian database here, and also a national database. So that whenever anyone's found that's not identified, we then place that also on that database to make sure and check that there's any matches. Yep.
Okay. And so if a family has a loved one who is suspected to be missing or is missing and suspected or is missing, when is an appropriate time for them to provide a sample?
They can provide a sample quite early, and we do get provided samples even when it's not a police investigation.
Mhm.
But for us, we have been contacted in Victoria, and I'm not saying this happens in every other state, and I'm very conscious that you're going to approach another state's DNA lab to say, can you please take this sample?
Mhm.
But for us, we've been approached by families and placed that sample on the database quite early. But the police should be approaching, or the families approach the police, say, right, I want this DNA sample to be placed on the forensic database.
And is that always the case, or is it sometimes that the family might have to drive this, because depending on the competency or the police officer driving the investigation?
From my experience with speaking with families that will call and ask, and that we can then follow up with the police, but they can as well. From the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, I do get phone calls from many families to say nothing's happened, or I need something to happen, and then we can assist that to take place. The police do need to assist you to take a sample, and that's because if you consent, your sample can be placed on what we call the national database, but that needs a special consent form taken with police. Now, even though that's a crime database, it is separate, the area, and is only searched against unknown, unidentified people. But that's why we ask the police to do it.
And are family members able to not consent if they don't want their
yeah, of course.
database?
Absolutely. And it's totally their choice. They can ask an interstate that it just be compared if there's a strong belief that they're missing in their state. And I've had that with a family, and they just wanted to compare what's happening in Victoria.
Okay.
And they believe that person's missing in Victoria. It's only on our Victorian database, and that's only held by the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, and only searched against people or human remains. I don't like to use that term, but people that are found unidentified in that state.
Which leads me to a question about the clinical language of the forensic technicians and pathologists and your staff as well. There is a certain way to talk about these things within the investigation process. Would you like to address the technical speak?
Yeah, and it is, and we talk about human remains. Those human remains we know belong to a person, belong to a family, but that words may be used, and we understand that. Often, well, I think families should expect, and I know there's so many respectful people right around Australia working in my area, that when you do call, we will warn you that we're going to talk about the practical process here, the practical steps. And at any point in time, you need to take a break, or you can request for that information to be placed in writing to you. Because we also know that one first conversation, people don't take it on board. There is so much information. So it's just about the first step and using that information. So we do try to warn you that the language is coming, but sometimes just to be clear, we sometimes do need to use those technical words, such as a bone or sample.
Yes, and that can be quite distressing, absolutely, for family members. And is it true that some family members may want to know all the information, tell me everything, give me all the detail, and some family members are just like, give me a light touch. I don't need to know everything. And you respect those.
Absolutely. Yeah. So some families have so many questions exactly and wanting to know, and want to put as much information. Many families just want to know, what's my next step? How am I going to get that death certificate? How quickly can I do it? What's going to happen? Some families, I'm saying things you all know. Some families believe that a person's deceased. Some people don't. So it depends on what question they're asking me, and that's the way we discuss it.
Yes.
We try to provide very accurate, clear information, and sometimes that may come across as quite blunt.
And I'm sure Sarah will address that in a sec when we get to Sarah, about how we can support families with that. Is there a protocol for viewing a loved one if they do go into the process, if a body does come into the mortuary, for example?
There is, and obviously if a person is found quite recently, every place around Australia has a place where they're supported by nurses or social workers. I've got nurses that support a person coming in, and they're in a sheet, and it's very respectful. It's definitely not like the movies, you know, it's in a room and yet they're well supported. But even if a person hasn't been found for a while and may not be in a state in which a person can be viewed, there may be an opportunity for someone to be in a room next to them, even if they're under a sheet.
Yes.
And again, that's up to a family and for options. Some families want to know exactly, please tell me exactly the state. Some people don't want to know at all. And so there's a whole lot of different options, and we just encourage families to discuss those options and ask what can be take place in their own state. In our state, we do allow a fair few different options, and it purely depends on a family and their culture and their belief and how they believe they need to do this.
Yes, and I can absolutely vouch for the respect and the dignity that you give all the families and all of the bodies that do go into the process. So I've witnessed that firsthand, and it is remarkable what you do on a daily basis. So and you've been doing it for such a very long time as well. So how can families verify their loved ones' records, whether they're current or active? If it's an active investigation with the court, for example, what can the families do if they want to know what's happening?
Call, and I really do encourage families to call. Sometimes I know in our jurisdiction we have long waits, and I say half an hour waits, or sometimes on the phone. It is unfortunate that people really have to advocate a little bit. You know, I wish that we did it better. I wish that we actively could ring quite regularly with a whole lot of updates. But absolutely, there's no reason why you can't call and ask. And I even say to many of my families, some of the families that I talk to, that don't worry about nagging. Ring me in 3 months. Ring me again if nothing's happened. Ring me just to find out nothing's happened. That's okay. And I really do. That's why we're here.
Yes.
You should call.
Absolutely. So thank you, Jodie. We'll move back to Steph. In relation to police briefs and timelines, what's the process for a police brief to be put together and to be sent to the court?
Yeah, again, that can vary significantly depending on the circumstances around a person going missing. But essentially, the police will gather as much information as possible about the person, their life, the circumstances immediately surrounding them going missing, and then they will provide that information to the coroner. The coroner will then look over it, from there decide whether or not there needs to be more investigation, whether there are particular pieces of information which the police have not been able to get, for example, because their powers might be limited, but a coroner might be able to get that information, or a coroner might decide, yes, I think that person has passed. I can now write a report into their suspected death and find that they have passed.
And what can families expect from the initial coroner's report, and what happens after it's filed?
In Queensland, what they can expect is that the coroner, who has an administrative team working for them, will reach out via letter, generally by email, with essentially a summary and a guide about what is a coronial investigation, providing then contact details. There will also be coronial counsellors who will make contact, often by phone in the first instance, who will then introduce themselves and be available to any family member who has a loved one whose suspected death or death has come into the coronial system. And through that counsellor, the families can advocate, get information, as well as through the administrative team. So in the immediate term, that's what the families can expect.
And in Victoria, there's a police coronial services unit that assists the coroner. Is that the same in Queensland?
Yes.
So they help if there's anything outstanding to get information about, or if there needs to be any liaison with any investigating police or other witnesses. So that is the same in Queensland?
Yes, so they'll either conduct some of the investigation themselves if they're routine and easily done. For example, pulling or obtaining records from the police database, or they will contact the investigators in, they're often, my coronial support officer is in Cairns with me, but my jurisdiction goes all the way up to the border with Papua New Guinea. So he will contact the officers in the Cape, for example, in Cape York, and ask them to gather information if we need it. So as much as they are employed by the police service, they're really acting on the direction of the coroner. So they're somewhat independent in that regard.
Okay, this one could be a controversial question, and I know that when we were discussing this in the pre-briefing a few weeks ago, how can a family ensure that their loved one's investigation is not being pushed to the bottom of the pile, and that it's because police have priorities in terms of active cases, for example, that often criminal cases take precedence over these kind of investigations, and unfortunately that is a fact. What can a family do to ensure and advocate that their loved one's investigation is progressing and moving along as quickly as possible?
I would repeat what Jody said. Just contact either the coroner's office, the coronial counsellors, or the officer with which you've had contact with in the police service, and just keep insisting. It will not, from my perspective as a coroner, it will not impact the coronial investigation or the quality of it. The more you advocate, unfortunately, like Jody said, these things take time, and I wish it wasn't the case that the system means that you have to just keep asking and contacting the various people that you have interactions with in the coronial system. Because from a Queensland perspective, I'll give you an example. After that initial letter, the administrative team sets a reminder for a 6-monthly update. So unless something happens, and for missing people, we don't generally have, for example, the outcome of a post-mortem examination. So once that happens in Queensland, where we have somebody who's passed, you'll then get an update about what the outcome of that is. But where there isn't any post-mortem examination, it will likely be 6 months before you get an update from the coroner's office. So absolutely, just can't be that squeaky wheel, because you'll get the oil.
Yes, and from my perspective, when I was a coroner, if I heard that either through Jody or through a registrar who might have been working with my team, a family was distressed and wanting questions or had questions or wanting answers, I would always say, please bring that to me, because if I'm not aware of it, I don't know. So, and coroners are only aware of the information that they're being provided. So if the family is calling, it's a necessity that they pass that information on to coroners.
Absolutely, and send an email. I mean, if there's something in particular that is quite distressing, beyond what it is that you're already having to deal with, which is obviously distressing and traumatic, tell the people that you're contacting, either in writing or over the phone, I really need the death certificate because I can't do X, or then I'm the same as you, Jacqui. I will prioritise and ask my team to come and bring me the information where there is a significant amount of distress that a family are going through.
Okay, and this kind of follows on from that. It's a family question that came through to Lily. Who will be on the family side? Should I trust the police or the courts?
Yeah,
a good question, because
it's a fantastic question, and
this is an unknown entity for a family member. Who can they trust?
Yeah, and I'm thank you very much to the family member who asked that question. Trust is a really hard one, thing, and it's quite easily lost. So I'm really conscious of that when I'm conducting an investigation. It's so easy for me to say, well, you can trust me, but you don't know me from a bar of soap as a family member. You don't know where I've been before I got this job and what I do every day, whether I'm showing up as my best self and giving everything that I need to the investigation about your loved one's suspected death. All I can offer is, I hope, some reassurance that coroners do come every day to the desk with the best intentions. Sometimes we get it wrong. We don't show up as our best selves, and we have to seek forgiveness around that. How I build trust, I think, is through transparency, where we have got it wrong and where we have caused unintentionally more distress, and I offer sincere apologies. Whether that means families can trust me, I hope that they can. Can they trust the police? Again, I think trust is built on, for me, actions. So, you know, you might trust individuals, but you may not trust systems, or it might be the other way around. It's a difficult question to answer, and I'm really grateful that somebody asked that, because it's quite challenging.
It is a difficult question, and I think I can assure people from my perspective of being a coroner that all of the coroners that I worked with did the best they could. They're selected for their expertise and their knowledge of the law and their experience. And I think everyone that I knew doing the job absolutely cares deeply about what they do. And that's a difficult question, but I think absolutely families can trust the courts and the police and the coroners investigating. But the other thing I was going to say is that there's a human element. So every coroner is different. So
Absolutely.
And that's an intentional decision by the government in the appointment process. So you might have all different shapes and sizes of coroners, and that's important because that represents the community.
Absolutely. And can I just say, and I've forgotten what I was going to say, so it doesn't really matter.
That's all right.
It'll come back to me later. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm also mindful of the questions, and I've kind of diverted myself off some of the questions. So
I do know. Can I just say, Jacqui?
Yes,
and this goes to trust. I think that often, coroners come to an investigation with a very clear set of boundaries about what it is they can and can't investigate, and you will find them in the relevant Coroners Act in your state, and there's often guidelines that accompany that act, or information on the website of the different courts. Because a coroner can't always answer the questions that a family have, they are acutely aware that they have their limits. It doesn't, I suppose, just reiterate that doesn't mean they're untrustworthy, and they feel for the families when they can't give them the information that they're looking for because they are confined with their investigations.
Steph, we will move on because I'm mindful of the time and I'm already behind my own timeline. So requesting an inquest, this is also a question for Steph and for Lily. Can anyone request an inquest be held, and what steps would they take?
Over to you, Lily.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Great to see you if I haven't met you before. Consciousness of I just wanted to speak to the trust thing. From my experiences, I had very limited trust in all of the systems, and I sort of took a more standoffish approach and maybe a more aggressive approach. But for me, I would always err on the side of the caution from my personal experiences. However, it is reassuring to hear those words from you. As a general note, like, coroners are very removed from families. So, for instance, like, I didn't have any contact with the coroner, just the people in their teams.
That is very true. Yeah, you don't just get to pick up the phone and talk directly to them. There's like 5 people in between that.
Yeah. But yes, you can request an inquest, and I have experience in doing that. Initially, and I'll very conscious of time, so I'll try and be quick without forgetting parts. But initially, the coroner that was looking at my mum's case decided that there would not be an inquest, and I felt very strongly that it was in the public interest and there was a number of issues that needed to be addressed through recommendations and further changes. One key thing, I took a few steps. Firstly, I was appalled that her case wasn't in the public interest, and possibly many of you may feel the same if you're, depending if you want to go down that path. So I thought to myself, I need to make this a matter of public interest. How do I do that? So I went quite the extreme end of the spectrum on trying to get eyes on her case, and I started a petition on change.org, which received over 22,000 signatures, stating that there should be an inquest. And I went crazy on social media, mainstream media, all of the above. And with that was speaking to the Attorney General. I did follow the coronial process of appealing and asking why, and sort of going back and forth with the administration team. And that I felt that they were annoyed at me, but maybe that's the person that I got. Then I also sought private legal advice to support me through that process, because obviously emotions are so high, and you just, like, I would just cry that, you know, no one cares about my mum, for instance. So I took a number of steps, and ultimately that led to a meeting with the Attorney General in Queensland, who then wrote to the State Coroner in Queensland. And then it was decided that there would be an inquest. But you can absolutely request for an inquest, and I would encourage anyone that is struggling with that to just push and push and push.
Yeah, I think the public interest is, and speaking in the same jurisdiction, a very significant factor. In fact, unless it's a mandatory inquest under our legislation, there has to be some public interest issue in order to hold a non-mandatory inquest. So if you are writing and requesting one, then look at what is a matter of public interest. So in Queensland, we have the State Coroner's Guidelines. It's almost like a how-to. You give yourself a best chance of a positive reception to asking for an inquest if you hit as many of those public interest factors that a coroner has to consider. You kind of back us into a corner, so to speak.
And they do have that in Victoria as well. And Lily, I was going to say that you are a beautiful example of having tenacity, resilience, advocating for having an inquest into your mum's suspected death. And like, I just admire you greatly for that. And yeah, it's amazing. And I think that a lot of the people watching wouldn't know that Steph was the counsel assisting the coroner at the time of your mum's inquest. And so you actually worked closely together, and Steph was helping the coroner, but she was also helping you in ways that she could as well.
Yes, yeah, full circle moment.
Yes. So should families hire a lawyer, or can they get legal aid?
Can I
Yeah,
go?
yeah, go Lily.
So I don't know, it was maybe fortunate that I wasn't in any financial position to afford my own lawyer, so I was able to access legal aid. I do want to preface that just because you have an income and can't access legal aid doesn't mean that there is not legal support available for you. And I would suggest, like, even with the MIST Foundation, we can come up with creative ways of finding legal support. And I wouldn't rule that out of your options just because of an income. So families definitely can seek legal advice. And personally, from my experiences, I would recommend it because they were able to help me get my points across in a legal manner to make it more digestible for the courts, I suppose. And yeah, I would highly recommend it, particularly if, in my case, there was a lot of parties, so like government agencies, police, not-for-profits, child safety, just a lot of interested parties that were involved in the lead up to my mum's disappearance that I thought at the time, and some of them still, could have done things differently. So that was really important to have legal representation to make that very clear from the outset, so that could be a part of the sitting days.
Yes, and I was just going to add on to that there are community legal centres that do pro bono work. There are also in Victoria that there are barristers that do a lot of pro bono work depending on the case. So it's definitely worth asking the question. It's definitely worth ringing Lauren or Lily and asking how can we get some assistance. But the other thing I would say is you don't need a lawyer, but if there are a lot of interested parties like in yours, Lily, it is recommended because you are just, it's easier for you to have your voice heard if you're being represented. I mean, it would, if you were appearing by yourself, you would still be very much listened to, but it's often helpful to have that independent person who's arm's length from the emotion of it all, because otherwise it could get very taxing on the person.
It's also better to have, 3 people thinking about the same thing as opposed to one.
Exactly. And also, sorry.
I was going to say, obviously there are degrees. I've been in inquests where some families have not wanted to advocate. They simply just want to sit and watch. And that's a matter for them as to whether or not they have a lawyer. If all else fails and for whatever reason you're unable to obtain legal representation, when I was counsel assisting, I couldn't give families legal advice. That would be going outside of my job. What I could do is take a list of questions from them, speak to them about the process. So really utilize the resource of counsel assisting within the court. I would say, add them to your list of people to call and regularly call for updates and ask them about the process and ask them to ask questions on your behalf. And they will, where those questions align with what it is that the coroner is investigating.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Steph. And we're moving on to submissions. So if anyone has gone through a process, the court process, after all of the evidence has been heard and the witnesses have been called, sometimes it's even without witnesses, the coroner will call for submissions. Could you explain, Steph, what that is, and do you need a lawyer to make your own submissions?
Yeah, you don't need a lawyer, but like you and Lily have both said, it can be useful. They can help you really focus and refine what it is that is important to you that the coroner hears and thinks about when they're making their findings and possible recommendations. So you can either make them in court and you can speak to them, or you can have someone speak about what your submissions are on your behalf, or sometimes you can put them in writing as well, depending on your coroner.
Okay. Another question came in from a family member. Can the coroner make a presumed death finding to allow families to access loved ones' assets and manage their affairs?
This is difficult. I think this is an area of reform in Queensland, actually, because it can very much cause problems for families. We can write a letter, but at the moment, we have difficulties with interim cause of death certificates, is my understanding.
And Jody, we can, in Victoria, they can do a document that can...
Yes, you can, but it's only once the coroner has made that finding of presumed death, then we can register the death. Okay.
All right. So thank you for that. Another question was, will, and we've kind of touched on this, but will being too proactive negatively impact the case? I think Steph and I and everyone else agrees that no, there's no amount of being pushy or contacting the court. It's worth it, so do it. So I think we've answered that question. And just moving on to families' rights now, and it's Steph and Lily again. What's a family's rights when it comes to what can a family do in this space? What rights do they have?
Do you want to go first?
Answer?
You can, Lily.
I feel like it may not be presented to you on a platter, like what your rights are in this process. It certainly wasn't for me. And even with some of the usual steps that have been discussed prior, I did not experience that even within Queensland. So from the outset, I would encourage everyone to ask, what are my rights? What supports and accesses are available to me in writing? Just everything in writing always. I think that's the safest way. Even if you have a phone call with someone, I would email that person and say, thanks for your time, blah, 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 blah. We discussed X. Just so in case you need to refer to your notes or any of those things, you always have it in writing. I'd definitely recommend that. But in terms of like specific rights, Steph has a really good anecdote, so I'll go back to it after, but you should be able to access a family room for the actual inquest sitting, so you don't have to sit with the general public or the media prior to going into the courtroom. I found that really helpful. You can request support services from the courts. Again, Sarah will touch on that a bit more later. And there can be certain emotional, social and cultural adjustments that can be made within the courts. It's just a matter of asking. But I think you always have more rights than you think, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. One example where I sort of walked and pushed the boundaries is I felt that at the beginning of the inquest, the previous counsel assisting for various reasons wasn't the right fit and didn't have the case best interests at heart. So I requested for a different counsel assisting, which apparently is not common.
Go you, Lily.
Yeah.
So that's how Steph was the counsel assisting. So even if you think that you don't have a voice, you certainly do, and just continuously keep pushing. But I wanted to throw to you, Steph, in regards to taking breaks and like your perspective on that.
Yeah, I am really committed to making sure that families know what their rights are. So I would absolutely echo what Lily said about asking, just ask. The worst, I mean, it can feel awful when you get a no, but you know, you might weigh up getting a no versus never knowing whether or not you can do something. One example is if you're in an inquest and you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, I just can't sit here any longer. It is just too much for me. I need some time out. But you don't want to walk out in the middle of evidence, or maybe you just simply need to use the bathroom. If you're represented, ask your lawyer to ask the coroner for a break, a pause in proceedings. If you're not, simply if it's just you, stand up. That will tell the coroner you want to speak to them and say, can we please have a break? I need a moment. I need 15 minutes. Break from what we're listening to. And I would say that there would be very few coroners who would say no. Unless there's some kind of strange video link to Ireland and it's 3 a.m. over there. But even then, if it was me, I'd say absolutely. So it's something as simple as that. If you need a toilet break, ask for one.
Yes. And there's only something else I would just add to that. You're entitled to the brief. You're entitled to the findings. You're entitled to the any evidence that's put before the court. You're entitled to have a say about whether something gets publicised. You're entitled to pretty much just advocate for your loved one. And yes, you might get a no, but you are entitled to ask these questions. You are entitled to have access to the information. So just know that you have rights. And because the coroner's court is about your loved one and the family is the most important group of people that come before the court, you do have more rights than you think you do. So,
absolutely. And it may be that you can't have the coroner will say no, but it might not be an absolute no. It might just be at the moment, I can't release this information to you because I'm also getting other information. So if you get a no, ask why. Because in my experience as counsel assisting, I wouldn't always, or acting for parties, I wouldn't always get an explanation why, and that could develop into mistrust. So I think absolutely ask why if you get a no.
Yes, great, thank you. So the next issue is about advocating for change. How can families effectively advocate for systemic change during the inquest? I guess this is about making submissions about recommendations. What can a family do if they see that the police didn't handle the matter appropriately, or a particular organisation let someone fall through, the cracks? What can a family member do to ask for change?
I'll just.
Sorry. Lily, sorry.
I think continuously asking from the outset. Again, this whole thing is just ask. But making sure it's known from the outset, which we've already discussed, and putting that in the submissions. And I think, again, just the real emphasis on from the beginning, although something might come up, but that's okay, just add it in. But for me, at least, the recommendations and the findings felt like really final and very important. And I placed a lot of weight on that. So just making it super crystal clear that it can't be misinterpreted, what things you want change and what concerns you have.
Okay. That's great, Lily. This is another one that I'll get you to address, and I think it's a family question. How do we address the dynamic of don't think you know more about my loved one than me?
Yeah, it feels, again, like you don't have any power in these situations. And a lot of so the courts are coming in blind, essentially, except for the evidence that they have. So it's in certain cases, and particularly in my mum's case, there can be a picture painted about your loved ones, and certainly was in my experience, and that does not reflect your lived experience of your loved one. So for, like, I don't know if you're comfortable sharing this, Steph, but Steph and I had an interaction after one of the initial court hearings prior to the inquest, and I wasn't happy with sort of the language used to describe my mum, so I made that known, and then moving forward there was no issues around that. And I think that really made me feel more comfortable with how the courts were speaking about my mum, because in her case there was a lot of victim blaming. So yeah, that's just one example.
Yeah, and I can say wholeheartedly that if Lily had never brought that to my attention, I would have continued in a way that was unintentionally, but nonetheless hurtful. And it was also paradigm creating about Lily's mum. And from the moment Lily raised it with me, it was an immediate change in the way that I thought. And I don't think I got it right all the time, but I'm just so grateful for that. And it has, in fact, influenced every single other inquest that I have done in the future. So you may not create systemic change, but you can certainly create individual change by speaking up about your loved one.
Can I add something about the brief?
Yes.
From my experience, I had access, and still do actually, to a very large majority of the brief. However, there were certain things that I was only allowed to access for a couple of days. So for instance, like the specifics of the ground searches of the police, and I had to sit in a room to listen to my child police interview. However, I really pushed hard with my legal team who had the brief to give me the full brief. So that is just really important, because I know that we have families that haven't had full access to the brief, and that isn't right.
And I can make a comment about this. It does depend on, unfortunately, on the coroner. I say unfortunately because in Victoria, for example, there are 13 individual coroners, and they all have different ways of doing things, which is very frustrating for people looking in. And so, for example, if someone asked me, can I see a video CCTV, or can I see photos of whatever, I would say yes, because who am I to judge what the family is or is not capable of viewing? I would do it in a way, I would get someone like Sarah to explain what the evidence they were about to view was, so they're protected and looked after in that way. But I would not withhold a lot of information that the family wanted. However, some coroners take a different view about that. They have this kind of, well, no, we've got to protect them, and they wouldn't want to see this. And my view is push back if you get that answer, because how do they know what you are capable of viewing? And it's your loved one. So I'm not speaking ill of coroners. I'm just saying they're all different individual humans, and they have different ways of looking at things like this. So if you don't get the answer you want, ask for reasons and ask for them to look at it again. And if you're not happy, then you can always go to the state coroner. And if you're not happy, you can go to the media. And if you're not happy, you can go to the Attorney General. Like, there are ways to get what you want. I know that sounds, now that I'm not a coroner, I can say these things. But I'm just giving you a little heads up that there are ways around things. And sometimes a letter to the state coroner can get the result that you need. Anyway, I'll leave that there because I'm getting controversial. Anyway, so we'll move on to media and public considerations. And once again, Lil and Steph, what are the risks, benefits of engaging with the media, and should I feel guilty if I choose not to? So Lily, you are a perfect example of using the media to your advantage, but there are other families who may not want to have anything to do with the media. So how would you advise families to deal with that?
Obviously, I can only speak to my experience, but firstly, I'd like to say, do not in any way feel like you need to use the media. It's there as a tool, but that does not discredit your love or discount any of that in regards to the effort and love you have for your loved one, if that makes sense. I probably jumbled my words a bit, but it doesn't mean that because I'm out there talking about my mum that you should be out there talking about your loved one if you don't want to, because there are certain downsides to the media, and it can be very taxing, and there is a lot of speculation, as maybe we're all familiar with in this room, and that's really hard to read, and it's quite frustrating. And in my experiences, there was a lot of victim blaming, and it's very angering to read those things and just know that that view is completely opposite to how you know your loved one. So there are ways to do it, and the Miss Foundation is a great resource and has immense knowledge of how to interact with the media strategically to avoid any mishaps. And I would like to also add that journalists are not your friends, even if they're friendly, and that nothing is off the record. So if you are speaking to the media, just always have your guard up a little bit, because you can be used against you, and
they're looking for a story, right?
Yeah,
they want a front page article. So, you know, they might say, "Oh no, it's fine. It's just between you and I." But I agree with you, Lily. You just can't really trust them. That's probably.
But yeah, your mental health is the most important thing. So if you don't feel like talking to the media, don't.
Yeah. And Lauren, do you have anything to add about that? Because I know that you've had lots to do with the media. Do you think we should trust the media? Do you think they can be used to your advantage if dealt with appropriately?
I think it's wise to be, cautious, as Lily said. They are, a pretty effective tool if you have something clear, an outcome that you're hoping to achieve. But I would suggest coming to us. We have a pro bono relationship with a brilliant strategic communications firm who help us with all of our media and comms advice, because, like Lily also touched on, it can also invite some unwelcome aspects as well. So if you are considering it, please feel free to reach out and run it past us, and we will certainly help however we can.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. The next question is about social media, particularly during inquest sitting days. Steph, can you address that? And can you also address the issue if there's a suppression order and what that means?
Yeah, so sometimes a court will make a suppression order or a non-publication order, or essentially say that certain type of information cannot be heard or disseminated outside of the room or the walls of the court. So, or people cannot be identified by particular information that might make its way into the public domain. So it's really important.
An example is if there's a suspect, if it's a suspected homicide, for example, and the media or the general public don't know the identity of a suspect, that might be an example, although generally they would have the criminal case first, but it might be something like that, that they don't want the public to know who the person of interest is, for example.
Yeah, or something like in an inquest I've done recently where 3 of the witnesses were either respondents or aggrieved or named people on domestic and family violence protection orders. So that legislation says that that's information which is not to be published. So I then had to make another order saying that these people cannot be identified as, people who were either named or on a protection order. So that's
can be really tricky, but I think the advice that we would, not that we're giving advice, we're just giving suggestions. If it was during an inquest social media is probably not appropriate. Does anyone agree? During the,
I don't want to stifle anyone because I think we live in a country where freedom of speech is really important. I think if you were going to put anything on social media during an inquest, be mindful there are consequences for breaching non-publication or suppression orders. They can be fines, it can be worse depending on what the breach is and the impact of it and your judicial officer. So there is that to be mindful of and your own personal impact. But then you could, where there's no suppression order, accidentally impact what evidence is going to be heard the next day or the day after, or for the remainder of the inquest. Because essentially, I think as a coroner, I want to provide an environment in the courtroom where every single witness has the opportunity to give the best evidence they can. And so you might put something on social media. Let's take a doctor reads and they're due to give evidence 2 days later. That doctor might see the social media post and become so nervous or anxious about the inquest that they come in and they actually freeze. So they don't give the best evidence that they can. So then
they might even seek to be excused based on the fact that they've been unfairly represented. So it's really it's tricky.
It is tricky. And Lily, you've had this personal experience yourself.
Yeah, so I was quite keen to be very public about social media, and my lawyers advised me, and one tip for anyone here that is yet to go through this process is if you want to post, just reference what's already been said in the media. So because of the public nature, which we'll get into a second, and if in my case that the inquest was due to public interest, it's going to be public. So the media is going to be interested, therefore report on it. So what I did was I would, if I made a post or a video or whatever, I would just reference explicitly what was said on the ABC. And they're the professionals and court report every single day and aware of those boundaries more so than me. So that's what I did.
Yeah, and that's safe because they got lawyers that give them advice about whether they can appropriately comment on something. So the next question, I think this is a family question, Lily. How do families manage the public narrative during active investigations? Is that what you were talking about before, when a loved one can be misrepresented in the media, for example?
Yeah, I think that you do have, obviously, the power to speak and have a statement. So, for instance, there might be a lot swirling around at the time of the inquest or after it. There is the opportunity for you to address the media and give a statement if you would like to. Within that, you may want to address who your loved one was and is, as an example, and your feelings about, say, the inquest. But often what you'll see and may experience is that the public's perception of your loved one is very different to who you know. And that's really hard to grapple with, but that does not take away anything about your loved one and how you know them. And I don't want anyone to feel responsible for that, but there is the opportunity to make a statement, for instance, if you would like. But yeah, you can't control it, which is the hard thing.
Okay. Moving on to victim impact statements and submissions. Steph, it's not termed this in Victoria, but it might be in your state. What is a victim impact statement and why might it be edited to remove blame?
Yeah, so we call it a family statement in the coronial jurisdiction in Queensland. Yeah, I mean, in the criminal jurisdiction, it is a victim impact statement, and they can be similar because what they tend to do is tell the coroner how the person's suspected death or them going missing has impacted the family. I also really love it when a family uses their statement to tell me about their loved one, to really actually shape the narrative. And so often what I read, it moves me to tears and it makes its way into my finding because it shows me that I only know this much of this person's life. And I love it when a family give me this much because it does show me how much they were loved and who they were.
Yes. And often, you're right, the coroner only knows what the information that's being put before them. So
Yeah.
they don't know that they were a wonderful sports person, or that they loved animals, or that they contributed to the local community in any way. Like, that stuff is really important when a finding is being written about this person's life, which is basically the last chapter of this person's life. So if a family member provides that information to the court, it just changes how the court views it, because they know they've got more information.
Yeah, and I tend to kind of, when I'm in my chambers reading them, I feel like rather than a family statement, I like to think of them as a love statement, because it's so often, and families will read parts or all of this to me in court, or maybe they just want me to read them privately. But so often what they show me is how loved this person was. And I really think it pays tribute to them and their life when all we've heard about is their death. Or their suspected death, as the case may be.
Yes, it's really important. So another question about communication is, how do I clearly communicate my goals for system changes in my submissions? I've sort of moved on from submissions, because we kind of dealt with how to do submissions, about recommendations and stuff. I think we did touch on that. But how do I clearly communicate my my requests for recommendations and any kind of proposed changes if I'm a family member?
The lawyer in me says, even if you dot point what you want to change, put a little footnote or in brackets where that evidence supports it. So where in the brief or where in the information that you have supports the change that you want, or shows why the change is necessary, because it might show how horrendous a particular police officer's investigation, for example, Lily was, and that might be the reason that there needs to be change, or training, or, you know, a review of something.
Yeah. Or police procedure, or that didn't work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Moving on to coroner's findings and recommendations, and we kind of have touched on this, but what is the formal process, or what's the formal purpose of a finding, a coronial finding and recommendations, and how are they delivered? Steph?
Well, if it's a non-inquest finding, they are delivered in private via letter or email to a family, and the purpose is to answer the questions: who, what, when, medical cause of death, and the circumstances of the how. Inquest findings are delivered publicly after an inquest, sometimes many, many months after an inquest is finished, and then a coroner will either read them in full or a summary, and say in the public what their recommendations for change are. And the purpose of that is to have a public record, because you've had a public record of all the investigation information, and so now a public record of what the coroner has determined.
Yes, and just adding to the recommendation element, it's different in different states, but in Victoria, if a coroner makes a recommendation to an organisation or a government body, that government body or organisation has to respond within 3 months to say, yes, we're considering this issue, or yes, we've changed it, or yes, we've adopted it, or no, we haven't, and give reasons why. So it's a way of holding those bodies accountable for the recommendation if nothing happens, because often I used to love doing this. If a coroner had made a recommendation and then the organisation, let's say the police, say, no, we're not going to do that because of all of these reasons, and then similar cases keep happening, you keep going back to the first one saying, this recommendation has been made multiple times and this organisation keeps saying that they're not going to change, but meanwhile the issue keeps happening. So they can be used against the organisation as well, which is important to know.
Yeah, and I think for family advocacy too, if you want real change, then pick your battle with an organisation. I can say this from when I was acting for example, hospitals or police services in inquests. They might not be able to do everything, but if it's something really important to you for a change and you think there is a way to practically and quite easily achieve it, get them on board too, you know, before the submissions are made, before the findings are done, because they're more likely to bring about, you know, one or two kind of quick wins, and I don't mean any disrespect when I talk about them that way, but these organisations are big and they will find, the ways that they can implement recommendations in the easiest way that they can.
Great. So the next one is also a contentious issue if you're talking to a coroner. How long does it take for a coroner to deliver findings? And that is like, how long is a piece of string? So you might have someone who can do it really quickly, or you might have a process that's taken a long time because there's lots of investigations, there's lots of interested parties, there's been false starts with inquests or not inquests. So it really does depend, and there's no set time in any of the legislation that says a coroner must make this finding within a time. So it can take years, it can take months. Steph, do you want to add anything to that? And it's really frustrating if you're the family waiting for this finding.
And it's frustrating for the coroner because all I want to do is give the families the answers or some of the answers to the questions that they have. For example, I have over 260 active investigations and a team of 3 assisting me with those. So that's one of the factors that can, impact how long it takes. I have a matter that I tried to do findings on 2 months ago. They're ready, but for one final piece of information, it comes back today and it's now opened another can of worms. Now, this is a lady that passed 4 years ago. So there are so many factors and it is so frustrating for families. But please know that it's also frustrating for coroners because we just want to have those investigations complete for you.
Okay. We've dealt with the recommendations, timelines, impact statements. Why might impact statements be edited and why can't we attribute blame in a coronial setting? We didn't kind of address that issue in the victim impact statement aspect.
No.
Why can't a victim impact statement say that person did it?
Because a coroner can't, in Queensland and Northern Territory, a coroner can't find somebody guilty or liable for a death. So it goes outside of what the court can do. So at the very basics, it means it's not able to be heard by the coroner.
Yeah, and we haven't quite addressed this issue specifically, but if there is a criminal aspect to the investigation, the coroner usually waits for that outcome, and we've seen it in the Daniel Morecambe case, for example. There's numerous other cases where, and there's active ones ongoing all over the place, but if there is a suspect or a person of interest and the homicide squad is investigating it and they don't actually take it, no one gets charged, it can actually mean that the case just stays open and the coroner can't close it, which can also be really frustrating. So the coroner will wait for the criminal process because usually, except in the Daniel Morecambe case, they didn't, because they did it in a different way to get the result. But that was an unusual approach.
Yeah.
And there are rules about entrapping a witness, and if you did that, then that evidence would be inadmissible. So there are lots of legal issues associated when it is a criminal case, and but the general rule is to wait for the outcome of that process, which means that if no one's ever charged when there's a criminal activity, it means that there's cases that just wait and wait and wait.
Yeah. Yeah. Lily, did you want to say something?
No, because it's the next question and I got ahead of myself.
Sorry.
Okay. I think this is the question. If the findings are if the findings are unsatisfactory or new evidence comes to light, what can the family do? Lily. Oh no, okay. Steph.
Appeal. So you can, in the first instance, you can write to the investigating coroner if it's a finding that you don't like and you've got an issue with. It might simply be that there is a misspelt name that really upsets you. Write to the coroner, have it changed. Then you can write to the state coroner. You can appeal through a court process as well if you're unhappy. I think all of the coronial jurisdictions will have that information on their websites. or ring up the team and ask, how do I overturn these findings? If you get more information, you can go to the police officer that you had in dealings with, or just the police service, or you can come back to the coroner's court and let them know, and a coroner will generally and ask for the investigation to be reopened.
And there's a formal process in most states where where whoever's asking for the investigation to be reopened, they have to actually apply to the coroner, and they have to give the evidence that they think is new that wasn't before the coroner in the first place. And there are legal tests that determine whether that is applied or not. And also there's guidelines on the website about that. And if it is a typo, a date of birth wrong, or a someone's name, there's something in Victoria called the slip rule, and you can ring the coroner's court and say, can you change this? It's really hurtful to our family or whatever. But if it's something like, I don't agree with the finding that you made in relation to blah, that has a fundamental impact on the veracity of the finding, that would have to be appealed to the Supreme Court in Victoria. And that's how it, yeah. So now we'll move on to counselling, and Sarah, you've been very patient and sitting there and waiting for these great questions. So what support is available for families in the coroner's court space?
So it can depend on which jurisdiction that you're in. So from my work, I was in New South Wales. So within the coronial system in New South Wales, if it's a missing persons matter and there haven't been any remains located, you'd be able to be supported by the social workers within the coronial information and support program. So they can kind of help you in terms of just prepping for an inquest. They can also help if you wanted to access the briefs or review any sort of material before the inquest. They can support you with that as well. If I'm not quite sure what's available in other jurisdictions, so maybe Jack and Steph might be able to shed some light on that.
There's a family liaison officers. So if a family is distressed about a matter or wants to view a piece of the evidence that the coroner will only allow them to with support, they'll talk to them. If they're unhappy with the process and they're not getting anywhere with the registrar or the coroner, they can talk to the family liaison officer if they're feeling enormous grief and not coping with the process. It's not formal counselling per se, but they can refer you to counsellors or services that can support you. But they're also there, from my experience in Victoria, the family liaison officers were so beautiful, and they would have conversations for hours with people, just sit there and talk to the family and try to help them get to what was causing their distress or concern, and try and get the outcome. And then those family liaison officers would bolt up to the coroner's chambers and beg the coroner, can you do this? They're distressed about this. Can you help? Like, it's really, and if I heard that information, I'm going, okay, how can we help? What do they want? And how, within the realms of the ability of me to, within the law, do this, how can we do this? How can we get the outcome?
And that would be the same from my experience. So I was one of the social workers within the forensic medicine side, but we worked really closely with the team over in the Coronial Information and Support Program, and it was the same. So if there was any kind of communication that needed to be fed back to the coroner, that the social workers in that team would be the ones that would take that back and say, look, this is where the family's at, this is what would be helpful, what can we do here? And also within that program in New South Wales, we also have the Aboriginal Coronial Information Support Officers as well. So yeah, we've got both teams sort of working together there. I'm not sure for Queensland how that lands for you guys.
Yeah, we have our coronial counsellors and our coronial nurses. So the counsellors are largely the social workers. So I think similar, Sarah, to what you were describing in New South Wales. The coronial nurses will help with the more with help families understand the more technical information they might be receiving about medical findings, for example. So they'll help understand and interpret that information. They're based in Brisbane, but they are on the phone with a free call across the entire state. And we have our cultural capability manager who will help First Nations families through the process. We are not as progressed in our support of First Nations families in Queensland in the coronial system, but it's something that we are improving day by day.
Yeah, okay. And Jodie, did you want to add anything about the support available? You kind of touched on it. If a family wanted to come in for a viewing of a body, or if they wanted information about technical clinical information, what other things are offered within your service in Victoria?
So similar, we've also got what we call family health nurses. So they will actually meet and explain the autopsy report or the medical reports or any of the reports or any implications, even if there is no findings, to what that means. We've also got nurses on 24/7 as well. We've also got our Aboriginal medico-legal officer who will support families, and then that leads into the court Yunboy Marrup unit, which will also support our Aboriginal First Nation people.
Okay, thank you. And we kind of touched on this, but Sarah, do you want to add anything about exercising rights of family members during an inquest? Like, what can they ask for? What kind of support can they request?
Yeah, so certainly from my experience within the New South Wales settings, there were little rooms outside of the court that could be reserved for families if they just needed that breakout space, that they could go and sit in there. It also gave them privacy if there was any sort of media lurking around, if they didn't want any involvement with media. Also just being able to ask for breaks, whether that's through the social workers within the coronial information and support team. And I think it was always really important that you are kind of just able to, respectfully say, like, hey, I just need some time out for the moment. It is generally very well received because it is such an intense time as well. And the coroners are really mindful of what that experience is like for families sitting in the room as well. So always good just to kind of, get some preparation around what's actually available in your jurisdiction in terms of that support for families, and just, really, being comfortable in being able to say, I need this right now.
Great. And Sarah, how important is information to families, even in explaining the process before the process happens? So whether it's an inquest or whether it's viewing a body or whether it's looking at CCTV footage, how important is it to give the family the information before they see it, and why is that the case?
Yes, I think certainly for families that want to be able to see, some families will be very clear, I don't want to know, and other families will be like, yep, I want to know everything, or I want to know things in a way that is sustainable for me and not going to overload me. But I think particularly for the families where, it's important for you to know before everyone else does in that setting of being in an inquest, or before that information then goes out into the media, that you have that opportunity to be able to sit with that, have your own reaction and response to it, and to be able to do it in a way that's safe and contained for you. So I think, if that is something that you would like, to ask for it. And I think it might have been Jack before that, sort of said, if you don't get the answer that you want in the first place, because sometimes whether it's the police kind of withholding, information that's in the brief, or if the coroner's saying, no, we're not willing to release this information just now, or even if it's around, potentially viewing your loved one's remains, that people will say no, it can be quite sort of a paternalistic, well, we need to protect you, but actually sometimes that causes more harm than being able to prepare you emotionally for what it is that you're about to see. So definitely, if that's something that's important for you and that's what you want to do, absolutely, you have every right to be able to ask for that information and, what supports are available for you to view that.
Yes, thank you for that. And the other thing that I've been very mindful of this evening, and I know everyone else has as well, that this is a lived experience for the families that are tuning in and watching this. This is a real thing. This is happening to them. So some of the things that we may have been discussing tonight may have been quite distressing. We've been talking about it in a clinical way. We've been trying to talk to you in a educative, helpful way. But I understand also that I certainly haven't gone through this as a lived experience, and I acknowledge that. And so if we have caused any distress or concern to any of you tonight, we are here to support you. But is there anything that the families can do to support themselves during this whole process? I mean, it's devastating to be talking about this, but it's also a fact that may have to be acknowledged at some point.
Yeah,
so what can families do
absolutely.
to support themselves?
Yeah, so look, I think the really kind of important thing firstly is to just acknowledge that everyone that's here online tonight, like you said, this is a lived experience for you, and some of you may have been doing this for a very long time, living with the ambiguity of, what has happened to your loved one. But also just that, idea that coronial processes like we've talked about tonight are kind of how long is a piece of string. So yet more kind of uncertainty within the systems that are part of having a loved one that's missing. So this isn't a short-term crisis for you guys. You would know that better than anyone else, that, that this is long-term, it's emotionally exhausting, overwhelming, and, the coronial process at times can also be deeply re-traumatizing as well. So, I think when we talk about self-care in this space, it's not kind of like the stuff that we hear, with the well-being online that, have a bubble bath, go and get your nails done, get your hair done. Like, what we're actually talking about is being able to sustain yourself over a long period of time, and, sort of finding yourself living between hope, fear, grief, determination, numbness, and sometimes all of those feelings in the same day. I think first and foremost, really important that, just kind of acknowledging that this is a really human response to a really inhuman situation, and that there's no right or wrong way to do this. And for many people, it kind of doesn't feel like switching off for a moment is possible. So it can just, I think really for families navigating this experience in the coronial setting, just doing kind of really simple things around grounding yourself before going into, sort of any meetings, hearings, or, phone calls that you might be waiting to hear, whether that's, from the courts or it's from the police. So maybe just sort of taking a few deep breaths before you're about to head into something that is going to be challenging and heavy. I always like that idea of just kind of, really feeling your feet on the ground to help ground yourself. Oftentimes even just sort of, having something with you when you're about to go into a meeting or a hearing or taking that call, just a little comfort object that you have that you can kind of connect with in that moment. And then also after these sorts of, meetings, phone calls, hearings, just kind of giving yourself a little note that what you've been in, or, in that moment, that you're no longer in that setting right now. So, whether that's just sitting quietly in your car before you go home, just sort of having that transition space from a difficult conversation to home, if it's putting some music on that's soothing for you, calling someone safe, just to have a yarn with them, taking a little bit of a walk, just something to, even though they're really small, it can just kind of remind our nervous system to move out of that survival mode for the moment, even if it's just briefly to give yourself a bit of a rest. I think within the coronial system, you know, that you can often feel a lot of pressure to constantly stay engaged. You know, you're reading everything, answering every call, holding all of the information. You know, we sort of heard about Lily's advocating tirelessly for her mum as well. All of this stuff is really important, but it's also just that reminder that it's okay that you can take breaks sometimes, ask for information to be repeated. I'd always say to families, you know, be like, oh, it's a silly question. I'd be like, the only silly question is the one that you don't ask. So please ask all of the questions, ask the same question a million times. If that's how many times it takes you to absorb that information that's important for you, that's fine. Ask for information in writing, you know, have support people that you can go to. We talked about that idea of stepping out of the room if it's feeling too heavy or too much. And just that reminder as well that sort of pacing yourself in this situation is not avoidance. It's just a way of kind of protecting yourself so that you can continue on the journey without being completely depleted. Also just, you know, that reminder of keeping connections with your loved one who's missing, you know, so whether that's talking to them, if it's visiting places that are meaningful for both of you, listening to songs that they loved, you know, whatever that is that, you know, what we know for people who are living with a loved one that's missing is that our relationships don't disappear just because they're not physically present with us. Also just kind of leaning into community, so people who understand you and are happy just to sit beside you and not try and fix your grief, because we can't, right? This is what you live with every day. So just kind of reducing that isolation and not having to explain yourself to people who just kind of get it, you know, that reminder that we don't need to hold all of this on our own. You know, and again, just that reminder that there's no way, kind of no right or wrong way to navigate this process. No perfect way to grieve uncertainty. And just that reminder as well that, you know, as you're navigating this process, that you can hold that same kind of compassion and kindness for yourself that you would of somebody else who might be experiencing this as well. Because sometimes our inner critics can expect a lot from us. So it's nice just to kind of, you know, go, okay, yeah, look, I might feel really down at the moment. I might feel really angry, whatever it is. But hey, that's pretty understandable given the circumstances. And I think we're often much more gentle and kind to other people than we often are to ourselves. So just that reminder for some, yeah, self-compassion and self-kindness. Mm-hmm. I think that would kind of be my main, you know.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there, you're going to do a grounding exercise before signs off for the evening?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that now for sure. Okay, so just a couple of minutes, I guess, to help us transition out of this space gently. So, you know, we've talked about some heavy experiences today, and even when we're listening online, our bodies can still carry tension, emotion, or fatigue afterwards. So this grounding exercise is just an invitation to reconnect with the present moment before we leave this space. You don't need to close your eyes or do anything uncomfortable. Just take what feels useful for you and leave the rest behind. So first, if you feel comfortable, just notice the chair or the surface that's supporting your body right now. So I'm going to sit properly for a second because I'm sitting like a prawn on my chair. So just feeling whatever it is that's supporting your body underneath you right now. And notice that you're being held up physically in this moment. And maybe take one slower breath in and a little longer breath out. Not trying to force anything, just allowing the exhale to soften a little bit. Now I'll invite you all to have a look around the room that you're in. And without overthinking or analysing, just notice 3 things that you can see. Maybe 2 things you can hear. and perhaps one little thing in the room that helps you feel a bit safer or steadier right now. Could be a pet, could be a cup of tea that you brought in with you, blanket, anything at all. And if it feels okay, maybe just press your feet gently into the floor for a moment and notice the support underneath you. Just noticing that breathing again. Nice deep breaths in and some longer ones out. Okay, and as we finish up today, just to kind of remind everyone that you don't have to carry everything from this conversation with you all at once. You're allowed to take breaks, you're allowed to rest, and you're allowed to take care of yourself while you're still caring deeply for your loved one. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you all so much for your invaluable insights. It's so helpful to learn about what these processes actually mean and look like from those who actually know. I think realistic expectations are especially important in a context where there's already so many unknowns. So I hope that you are all leaving feeling empowered with knowledge as you approach or anticipate a coronial inquest for a missing loved one. As mentioned, Sarah has made herself available for attendees that wish to speak with her one-on-one on Friday and beyond. Please email Sarah directly. Beyond that, MIST is able to cover the gap for those who do have a mental health care plan. So please just reach out to me if you've got any questions. You have heard a lot tonight about what is a harrowing prospect for any family. So please take care and don't hesitate to ask for our help. MIST is a teeny tiny organisation, but we will always do whatever we can to try and alleviate the impact. So thank you for your belief, for your support, and for your courage. Good night.